So good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's ELN webinar, which is a very informal chat with Lesley Crane and myself. And you'll have seen from the outline that we're very into learning theory and how we use it to inform our practice. And Lesley would like to talk through a new approach that she's been putting together and working on and get your input. Now, what I'd like to say is that you're probably all very familiar with Zoom meetings, but this is actually the webinar add-on, and because it's a webinar you're automatically muted and you don't have a video link, but it's a small group and we can afford to change that if you want to participate, and we do want you to participate. So at any time, if you do want to actually speak rather than just write in chat, then there's a put your hand up option and we can enable your microphone, and if you are keen to get on video as well, we can promote you to panelist. So I thought I'd just put that out there now because the webinar functionality is a bit different. But otherwise, you probably all know who I am, Joan Keevill, Chair of the ELN board. What you may not know is that my 4-year term will be up in November and I'll be standing down. So it'll be like having a limb cut off, I'm sure. But later on in the year, if you're a member, then you might be interested in getting more involved as a board member. But anyway, that's my background. I also run my own instructional design and learning consultancy company, but I'm here very much with my ELN hat on and a critical reader kind of approach to the whole thing. And I'd like to introduce Lesley. Lesley, let me ask you to introduce yourself and say a little bit about your background.
Sure, yeah. So I'm an expert in adult learning, in particular adult learning in digital learning technologies context, and I also am involved in considerable amount of research at quite often at government level. My interest in today is to talk with you about a particular approach to blended learning, which for me has been a bit of a thorn in the side for some years, so what I want to do is just kind of give you a little bit of an insight and heads up into the kind of approach that I have developed, which very much draws on considerable research and is grounded in the learning theory as well.
So we've got a poll to find out a little bit more about the participants, so let me launch that now, because we're quite interested to know what sort of area you work in, because between us I think we go right across the sectors, various sectors, don't we? Because I'm doing some work for charities, I'm doing some work for the health service, for private organisations, and you two, you go across the schools and HE sector as well, don't you? As well as business.
Well, not so much the schools, but definitely further education and upwards, including apprenticeships, T-levels, all that kind of stuff. Plus, of course, the learning and development sector.
We'll just give people a minute. Okay, I think we're there. So if I share the results, can you see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
So we've got, it's quite a good spread actually between corporate, public sector and also people working for themselves. Not so many in the charity sector. And then a large number of people who are learning or instructional designers. So a really good spread actually. Any comments on that, Lesley? And people can elaborate in chat actually. None of the above: consultant and digital strategy design.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, Joan. I think it's a really good spread. I'd be interested to know in a bit more specific about the public sector, the guys who work in the public sector, exactly which part of the public sector. But yes, it's a good spread.
Okay. Do you want me to go straight into the next poll, Lesley, about learning theory?
Yeah, let's just go straight into the next one, because that kind of is fairly pertinent to this morning's topic.
Now we get to the nitty-gritty. So what do you think about the amount of time and energy those in L&D devote to keeping across learning theory and keeping up to date with developments in the profession? And then a question about you, yourself, and your practice. I mean, the topic today is very much blended learning. And just to do a bit of background while people are doing the poll, when I moved from BBC Education to BBC Training in 2000, one of the first things I was asked to do was to run a blended learning training programme for the trainers in the corporation who were pretty much all face-to-face, you know, camera skills training, that kind of thing, editing. And at that point, we did introduce a professor from Lancaster to talk about learning theories that underpin learning design, but also at that time they didn't really know very much about e-learning, even though the BBC was launching its own e-learning portal then, back in 2000. So a lot of the focus was on, is the blend, does it need to be face-to-face and some e-learning, and what does each work best with? But of course, I think nowadays, Lesley, there's such a huge range of things that could factor into a blended learning solution.
And I think that's part and parcel of the problem, which I'm going to touch on. Blended learning, I think, is a term that's been kind of fairly blanket used to cover a multitude of things. Mm-hmm. In much the same way that the e-learning as a term has come to mean lots of different things. So now the thing is that for practitioners, people who actually work in the development sector, let's have a look at this. Okay, well that's positive. Don't spend too much time. Mm-hmm. They don't spend enough time. Well, hey, and I refer to learning theory from time to time. Okay, guys. So this has just turned into a lecture.
You promised it wouldn't.
Yeah, okay.
Does that surprise you?
Shall we just jump straight in then?
Well, a couple of things. Do those results surprise you? Do you think it's typical?
They do surprise me, actually. Well, one of them does, one of them doesn't. I think that says a lot for the professionalism of the profession, if you like. Okay. And it gives me a huge amount of heart to see that.
Mm. Now, there are some comments in chat. I don't know if you're keeping across those.
Yeah, just the Royal yourself. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to have a whole bunch of really interesting perspectives here.
Okay. Well, do you want to go straight in then?
Okay. So you've said what your thoughts are about learning theory. So learning theory is something that I spend a lot of time with as part of my research. So it's not just research that I do on behalf of clients, but research I do on behalf of myself and my own work in this whole area. If I start with learning theory, just to give you a kind of a purview of the whole thing. In 2016, a report was published which counted 400 individual learning strategies or theories in the public domain. It's 400. Not one of them covers the entire gamut of adult learning. The adult learning is a field. So if you wanted to do universal application of something, in other words, you'd have to actually refer to more than one theory if your work was going to be grounded in theory. I think the other problem to do with learning theory is, you know, by and large, a lot of it's very, very nebulous, very ambiguous, very difficult to read, very difficult to access, which is why, to some extent, I kind of function as a research translator. And I think the other thing, just to finish on theory as theory, if you like, is to just bear in mind, theory is no more and no less than an explanation. Mm-hmm. It is not a statement of the world as it is. It's a speculative statement. Our theory is distinct, and we have the field of the learning sciences, which the learning sciences covers psychology, neuroscience, and a whole load of other things. So when I talk about learning theory, I'm talking about the learning sciences. Blended learning has been around for quite some time, as I'm sure some of you are aware. As a field of practice, it kind of first made itself known back in the 1990s, and that neatly coincides with the take-up of, or the introduction then of the term e-learning, and the introduction of the then internet. So that's where it's, but actually it goes back a lot further. If you think about blended learning as being any technology, then it then includes things like instructional intelligent tutoring systems and television sets in the classroom. And if you're as old as I am, you remember the television being wheeled into your primary school classroom when the guys stood on the moon, which was our first example of blended learning. So it does actually go back quite a long way, but in reality, blended learning is blended learning. It starts in about the 1990s, so it's got quite a long history. It's also got an enormous published research literature. It's huge, and this again, not always published within the context of the learning sciences, but it is a huge literature. But there's a number of issues with that. And first of all, blended learning, first of all, lacks definition. It has historically never been properly defined. In other words, there's lots of competing definitions. A lot of the research in blended learning is actually based on higher education, white students in America. So that's worth thinking about. The problem with it is very little connection to it all, but there are a number of studies that are published which are effectively literature reviews, and these are vast. And in the main, what these general literature review studies, or called meta-analyses, have concluded about blended learning is, by and large, give or take a sheet of paper, blended learning is kind of on a par with face-to-face learning, given X, Y, Z. Now that's all very well, but if you just think about one other factor involved here, and that is, what on earth are you comparing? Setting aside the fact that you might be talking about white students, middle class in universities in America, what exactly are you comparing? Because each context is very, very different. So I think there is some substance there. There is a probability that the results are significant, but nonetheless, there is that question mark. So
stop you there, Lesley, because I'm wondering whether we should put a question out to the group and say, what is your experience or definition of blended learning? How are you using it?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, it'd be very interesting.
Yeah, so if you want to just write in chat, or otherwise, if you want to speak, as I said earlier, we can enable your microphone. So what's your experience of blended learning? Is it something that you're doing? I mean, I suppose I should say kind of like normally, because everybody's gone virtual and doing all these different things now under lockdown.
Yeah, and it seems, I mean, what I've noticed in the last few weeks is that right at the beginning of the lockdown, I thought, well, hoorah, that means the end of blended learning and 70-20-10 and things like that. At last, we can clear the decks and get on with the proper stuff. But the last few weeks, 3-4 weeks, there has been a massive increase in interest in blended learning. So I felt motivated and confident enough to wheel out my thoughts on blended learning into the public once again. Having stopped for years, I was known as the Bible thumper. I would be invited to conferences to talk about blended learning, and I would thump the pulpit with my thoughts.
Got some comments coming in. Helen says she's working at the moment on a blended one.
Critical using multiple delivery methods, virtual video, yeah.
And just doing, yeah, discussion forums, videos, etc. Christiana, not done it yet, but she's been involved as a participant. Sarah, any mix of media, creating.
So are we basically saying that the general thing is it's a mix of face-to-face and digital?
With
in
the
main.
proviso that in lockdown, I think the face-to-face has become virtual, because that's
yes,
the
yeah.
So Kim says creating content which uses multiple delivery methods, which enhances the learning. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, face-to-face, virtual, video, etc. and waves. Yeah. Okay, so
university stuff. Mary is doing a mix.
Just to give some perspective, I asked that question of about 20 educators who specialize in ESOL learning in different concepts: further education, private delivery, and adult and community settings.
English as a second language, you mean?
English as a second language. This was back at the beginning of the year as part of a research project. Every single one gave me a different definition, but they were all very positive about blended learning. Nobody said it's a waste of time, I don't want to do it. They were all very positive, but everyone gave me a very different definition, or what they understood it to mean, which was interesting. So just looking at blended learning as a practice, the shortcomings of blended learning historically, what we have known over time since the 1990s as blended learning has been, in my book, three things. One is lack of clarity, which generally stems from this lack of definition. You read any blended learning published paper, it will have a different definition. Method. There is a lack, so clarity leads to lack of method. There is a lack of method. And there's also a considerable lack of an evidence base behind it, in terms of a reliable evidence base. So in terms of, why did I say a few minutes ago that it's been a bugbear to me? Because I've spent years talking to educators who said to me, how do I do this? And what does good look like? That's the classic question. What does good look like? I have no answer to that one.
But how much is people, I mean, how much are people, especially if they're new to it, how much are they driven by the technology that's available to them?
Absolutely. This is it, because maybe, I don't know whether it's the same thing in corporate development, it might be, but certainly in education, the emphasis has been on the uptake and using more technology, which was, generally speaking, a malaise introduced by the famous Feldtide report back in 2014, when it famously said everybody should start converting 10% of their further education curriculum into digital, and everybody took that as the benchmark. So educators have struggled to apply it, and I think they're not unique in that, educators in the education system, that is, because we also see so many books and guides and tips, to how do you do this, which are more generally available to a wider user base. So and I do think it's the technology first. That we start thinking from a position of, well, we're going to use our BLE, it's got chat, it's got discussion forums, we've introduced a new YouTube, whatever, it'll be great, we'll use all that. Yeah. What happened to the learning? What happened to the learners?
I would have said that would lead to more social learning, because people can be learning from each other by sharing ideas. You can post something, I can reflect on it and think, oh, I never looked at it like that before. That's something I could try out, and so on and so forth.
Yes, absolutely. But why do we have to start from, we're going to use this technology and then we're going to talk about social learning? Why can't we say social learning first? And how is that going to best work for these learners in this context, at this time, etc.? That's what I'm saying. Technology is second. So in other words, what we have been doing, and this is actually seen in an awful lot of the research that I have surveyed, is instead of measuring the message, the content, the thing that you're supposed to learn, what is being measured is the channel, the delivery method. Right. And to me, the channel comes after the message. Right. The channel is there to post it. It's not the letter. Right.
Well, that's,
So,
yeah, when I had the professor do an intro for the blended learning course in the BBC, I was trying to get them to think about how if you took a certain approach, like a cognitive approach to learning, actually, you know, you might just give somebody a PDF to read because they can quickly assimilate the information in it. But that doesn't necessarily help them transfer it into the workplace, because that would be
yeah,
more experiential learning or learning from doing scenarios and that kind of thing.
yeah, or
Miles has made a point about people being binary. Shall we bring Miles into the discussion? Miles, have you got your microphone enabled? I've just sprung that on you, so. Okay.
Oh,
There he is, right?
maybe that works. Sorry, I was just having a hardware malfunction. Should you what? I guess my observation is, yeah, my observation, I suppose, is born from sort of entering the world of L&D sort of maybe 6 or 7 years ago, where I discovered that there tended to be, this is only my experience, so this might not generalize, but there tended to be a position that face-to-face is the proper training, and we'll do digital if we can't do face-to-face, or if we need to track compliance for scale and cost. And I think that my hunch is that those two combined positions tended to mean that you either did one or the other, you know, rather than doing something more kind of subtle and sophisticated and actually that feels more like people's real lives. I guess, you know, we all tend to live and work in a blended world. We don't live in an entirely face-to-face world or an entirely digital world. But I was sort of struck by my early experiences in the industry defined in that way.
Thanks. Yeah, and it's interesting that I think it's Paul who said people are learning while they're working using their mobiles on the shop floor and that kind of thing. So, you know, I think the whole business about either or, if there hadn't been such a huge emphasis on face-to-face training, would everybody have panicked quite as much with lockdown as if they'd been more enabled of different approaches?
I think it's just technology has been used as the red herring. You know, technology has been seen as a thing. You know, I think technology is fantastic, used in the right way, the right circumstance, particularly where it can be used to do stuff that you cannot do in any other way, or which expands and upscopes what it is you want to do. Allows people to share with people who wouldn't normally be able to share with. You know, it's fantastic. It's just been grossly abused. And, you know, well, I better not go there because I'll start getting highly critical and I'll have hate mail.
What do you think is we should be doing? Let's move on to,
well, I think
the silver bullet, maybe.
I think we should look at what we actually know. What we actually know is that blended learning, by and large, has a similar outcome on learning effectiveness as face-to-face. But face-to-face has a much more profound effect, given the right person, the right context, the right topic, and all that kind of stuff, in the same way that digital can be the same way. So as the educator, what that means, I think the argument for starting with the message is even more profound. You know, in fact, before the message, the learner. You have to work to the learners, and I think that's the bit that's kind of got a bit blurred and we gloss over it a bit. You just kind of like lump people together, and that goes for face-to-face stuff as well. Absolutely.
Can I just ask you to clarify? What you're talking about educators now? You don't just mean people in education, do you?
No. Sorry, it's a term I use to mean anybody involved in the provision of teaching and learning of any sector, anybody whatsoever,
So all of us then.
and anybody who has a role which impacts on that.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, so the developer, the designer,
Yeah.
the script writer. So we're all effectively educators, because we all have a hand in what experience someone somewhere down the line is going to have, with some expectation that they will learn some new knowledge from it. So I think what has happened over years is perhaps the excitement about using learning in the classroom and in the training room and all that has a bit run away with itself, and we've got a bit in love with people who talk techie stuff, who can talk about HTML5 and what you know, all that kind of thing. I mean, I am guilty of the same thing. I remember when I ran an e-learning company, you know, I used to love running rings around my clients and, you know, talking about technical stuff. You know, because that actually, for some reason, seemed to strike more of a chord and make more of an impact than talking about learning.
Right.
Which I think, I don't know whether that's changed, but so my recipe is very simple. Start with a learner.
Right.
Start with a learner, then look at the message, then look at the context, and then look at the kit. You know, that's it. And therefore, you will find, you know, if I was to speak to an educator who says to me, oh, how am I going to do this? I'd say, very easy. You start with your learners, blah, blah, blah. By the time you work that through, you've got a mini strategy, which needn't necessarily take you a month to do, take you a day, half a day. Then you think, what is going to deliver that? What is going to give me that strategy delivered in the way I want it to be delivered? Because the strategy is designed for these learners. So there it is. You know, it's that. So that's my overall approach, and that is what I put at the heart of what I call the new blended learning, the thing I'm working on, the methodology. So there's that. The two other distinctive things about new blended learning are first of all, you know, oh heresy, blended learning to me is a blend of anything. It doesn't have to be face-to-face and digital.
Right.
A blended learning approach is a blend of whatever method, strategy, device is going to give you the delivery of what you need to deliver. That's it. And the second thing is the whole methodology is geared towards very distinctively learning with understanding. So learning with understanding is not the same as learning with memorization,
Right.
which is traditionally the kind of thing that compliance training is geared around. You know, you expect people to go through, learn all this stuff and regurgitate it at the appropriate moment when they're on fire or their room's on fire. They suddenly go, oh yes, I know how to do that. Learning with understanding is deeper learning than that, and it basically results in learning that's usable, actionable, and learning that is most importantly transferable.
Right.
So the context in which you learn it isn't the only context. You know, you mentally abstract all the detail of that piece of knowledge when you've deep learned it, and you can then call it automatically to mind and apply it in different contexts. So,
transferable into the workplace.
Transferable into the workplace. So it's all that. So the concept of learning with understanding is what the learning sciences are actually all about. That's their core.
Right.
Learning with memorization is a tiny bit. It's the bit that uses this minuscule part of your brain that learns stuff by rote. So you're like I learned the entire Iliad in order to sit my Latin A level many moons ago. The entire Iliad, so that when I was presented with the unseen translation, I would know it. And unfortunately, it meant I also knew an awful lot more stuff at the time, which was completely useless. And by the day after the Latin exam, I hadn't got a faintest clue. So memorization has its place, but what we're talking about surely is learning with understanding, you know, meaningful learning. So, and at the core of all this is, if I'm just going to share one slide with you guys, I have one slide to share, so you'll be pleased about that. And
question from Miles that we can pick up in a minute. So.
Okay, so that's it. So can everybody see that slide?
Yep.
Great. So what we're looking at here is what I call the CAP principles. They're all completely and utterly integrated. They're at the heart of the new blended learning. These I refer to as design principles. These are principles for the design of learning interventions and for the evaluation of learning interventions.
Right.
So very simply, connect and engage is about connecting to people's prior knowledge. That is, helping them to build new knowledge based on what they already know. It's about minds and emotions, it's about taking into account their motivations to learn and all that kind of stuff. So why connect and engage? Connect comes before engage. Just simply looking at engaging learners, as we often hear about, is not enough. You wouldn't invite someone out on a dinner date as a means of engagement if you hadn't connected with them and knew something about them. You know, otherwise you'd be very aware of running the risk of sitting in the company of somebody for 2 incredibly boring hours. So, you know, connect and engage, they're both essential. Actionable and sustainable. So we're talking about here about instant applicability of new learning, new knowledge, about reflection, about linking new knowledge and learning to real life scenarios, real life dilemmas. We're talking about allowing people to monitor and learning, all that kind of stuff. It's a bit like learning Teams, Microsoft Teams, which I'm trying to do at the moment.
Keeps changing though, doesn't it? They keep updating, I think.
It's not intuitive at all. I don't find it intuitive. So I've got on one screen, I've got the tutorial video, which is running through a pace, you know, and then I've got my screen. And I look at the video and go, oh yes, and I look at the screen, what? It doesn't bear relation. That's about actionable and sustainable. So what it says to me is their videos, tutorials are rubbish. Okay, somebody please pitch a new set. Personal and meaningful, my favorite one. This is about aligning, hey, this is new. Why can't we align the learning goals, the learning objectives, with individuals' personal goals? Because if we did that, they would think it's the learning, the new knowledge is far more meaningful to them. They'd be more prepared to take ownership of it, to make sense of it. You know, and probably become far better self-directed learners in the way of doing it.
Can I check there? Because I mean, I've done information security e-learning, and
I'm going to switch this off.
Just escape, I think. No, leave it on. I think it's fine to leave it on.
Right.
But what I was just going to say, I've done information security e-learning, and what we've often done is to say, you know, do you know how secure your home setup is? Or, you know, have you ever been at risk of fraud, like with your own bank cards or bank account? So if you can start in that personal domain and then bring it across to the organizational need for everything to be secure, I think that can really resonate with people.
But there's various techniques you can use in order to get to this. Because I mean, I know a lot of people say, nah, how are we going to do that? How are we going to know this? How are we going to know what they already know? How are we going to know what their personal goals are?
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, there's a couple of things you can do. One of which is, well, why don't you just first of all start by telling your learners how they learn. People who know how they learn are more likely to learn better and more effectively and take an interest. So I think if you take these three, and I'm not saying, I do not have a checklist. This methodology is not a checklist. It is designed to be adaptable by educators to their context. You take these as concepts and apply them. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying is, if you take these and apply them, you get a different perspective on what you're trying to do, and a different way of doing it, a different way of approaching it, so that you go through this process first, design accordingly, and then fit the delivery channel, whether it's face-to-face, digital, 100% digital, whatever it is. And then within that category of digital, you have got lots of different options. But my last sort of thing I want to say is, when you get to that point, don't be tempted to use the bells and whistles. You know, when you've got your strategy and you've worked it through and you understand your learners and what they're going to get from all this, and then you start looking at what technologies you're going to use effectively to deliver this, just because your institution or companies has an LMS or a VLE that has these bells and whistles, don't be tempted to use them. What purpose do they serve? That's the question. What purpose does this serve in meeting my requirement to deliver this learning strategy to these learners at this time in that context? You know, it's really quite simple. It's not difficult. And I think the whole technology complexity has overcomplicated things. Perhaps because it's necessitated educators having to learn new ways of doing things, having to understand technologies that they haven't used before. I don't know, but it's a kind of, I hate to use the term get back to basics. I don't think it is get back to basics. I think it's about, let's build on what we've done so far. Great. Now let's move on. It's that.
I wonder how the people in the webinar now, I wonder how easy you feel this is to apply in practice, or do you think you're already doing it? So I'd be interested in some comments from participants on this. I think
Miles, I think yes, I do think we get caught in the blended delivery and modes rather than a blended design of the experience. Exactly right. We start with, what is the experience? What blend of learning strategies or methods or ways of doing things will deliver this experience? You know, because as an educator, you're sitting there and you've got an open book. And now I know at some point or other, constraints will come into it. So the restrictions, the constraints, well, we can actually only do it online. Okay. Or we can actually only do it in this particular way. Or we can only do it using our organization's LMS. We can't do it in any other way. Fine, okay, so that's a constraint. You have to factor that in, but don't put that in at the beginning. Start with an open mind.
Helen's made quite an interesting point, because there is a tension. She's saying that it's very much about being user first and making sure you're aligning to their goals, not the CEOs, the marketing, the project managers' assumptions or preferences. Yeah. But, you know, I'm often in a situation where I'll get a brief because a sales pitch has already happened and a contract has been signed. So you are constrained by that. But yeah, it is a challenge. It can be a challenge, but I do enjoy working with clients and actually teasing out what the real issues are for the learners. You know, what is the ideal behavior? How are we going to what are they doing now? How are we going to bridge that gap? And it doesn't have to be an expert's, you know, 50, 80 slide deck PowerPoint. Oh, just make this the e-learning. Well, no. Just give them the PowerPoint if that's all you want, you know. So
yeah.
David's been in a prison environment. He's saying they should definitely place more focus on the experience of the learning.
Yes, I know David. Hi, David. this is entirely correct. What tends to happen in prison environments, and I'm about to make a rash generalization, and David will correct me if I'm wrong, is that by and large, the curriculum that's delivered is more akin with a primary school or lower secondary school curriculum, taught in the chalk and talk way. And given that based on a lot of research, contemporary research, approximately 50%, or in some cases many more, percentage of the prison population were chucked out of formal education at a very young age, and consequently have a very, very poor impression or experience of formal education. So expecting them to sit voluntarily and with an open mind and heart in exactly the same situation is a little bit stretching it. And as David is aware, that one of the things I've been involved in over the last year and a half is developing a revolutionary, I use that term advisedly, new methodology for education that does not involve that approach in any way whatsoever.
Interesting. I wonder what other people think. I mean, Helen's posted another comment. It's very difficult to fight for, but she does try and bring it back to the learners. Is it worth bringing your slide up again, just to remind people of the 3 stages?
Yes.
I presume there is, you have to work around the circle in order?
Not necessarily. It just so happens that this is a little sketch, that thing that I drew. It doesn't have to be this way at all. They're arranged because, for no other reason than I wanted a shorthand way of referring to them, CAP, and therefore connect, actionable, personal, and that's it. So they can be approached in any way whatsoever, and in some situations will need more thought. Others will require very little thought.
Have you found any of them more challenging than others when you've been working with people?
My thoughts are that actually connect and engage is probably the most challenging.
Right. Why do you think that is?
Because I think the ability to connect with people is not a given science, and it's not a given skill. I've made a particular observation of this over quite a long period of time, because I have no pride in saying this, but I am very bad at connecting with people. I'm the classic hugger of the wall. That's why I make such a good researcher. People don't see me coming, I'm a fly on the wall. But I think that connecting and engaging with people in a way that's going to be personal, meaningful to them is a real skill. And I think that the problem here is that oftentimes there will not be time or resource available to devote to looking at that particular element. So given that this is a relatively new methodology that is being put into the public domain, it's very much up for grabs about how best to do this, because as I said, it's a methodology. It's not a checklist of this is how you do it. It's a toolbox. The full methodology, the full new blended learning methodology, is a toolbox of solutions and methods and principles that the educator, depending on his or her context or requirement, can pick and choose from and adapt and mold and shape to fit their requirement.
So we've got another comment from Miles. Stakeholder understanding of what learning can be is sometimes are often quote limited. courses are easy to understand, how can we help traditionalists grasp the benefits of this approach?
How can you help the traditionalists grasp the benefits of the approach? What do you mean by traditionalists, Miles?
Well, hang on, I'll need to re-enable you, Miles.
Hi, I'll try and clarify. So again, this might be just the limitations of my own experience, but often I think in organizations, senior stakeholders kind of have this belief that when they want learning, they're actually buying courses. That's what they mean. And and a course is an easy to understand unit. We know what they are, what they look like, and that's what they expect. And I think I like this approach. It's great, and I think it's much more sophisticated and powerful. But I'm wondering, how do we try and educate our corporate stakeholders and decision makers to bring them on the journey of understanding why this is better?
I think that's a really interesting point, Miles. Thank you for that. I don't have the answer to that, but what I can say is I've spent the last few weeks talking to various learning and development managers and others, people who are, an executive level in e-learning companies and stuff like that. And the thing is, and also educational institutions, the thing is, I don't have to explain the CAP principles. I just say, these are the CAP principles, a tiny bit of explanation. Sorry, I do have to say a tiny bit of explanation just to say, this means this, that means that, that means that. They get it. They absolutely get it. To the extent that a webinar I took part in, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, there was a senior manager from a big college group present in the webinar. He contacted me afterwards and said, I want to use the CAP principles as the core part of our new project strategy for introducing new blended learning to the college. And that was it, just like that. And he sent me then his strategy. I looked at it, and he put these principles right in the heart of it. In their case, they're using them as evaluation benchmarks. So at the end of their project to introduce a new BLE across the college, they will use those CAP principles to evaluate to what extent the project has delivered against those principles. So that's why I call them design principles as well as evaluation principles. So the starting point is they make sense. It makes sense. It's not trying to be something it's not. And I think, as I said, it's a new approach, although it's not reinventing any wheels whatsoever. It is building on what's gone before. It is entirely down to those people who choose to take this and use it to shape what it eventually becomes.
If I could come back in there, I read a post yesterday by Charles Jennings. It was on LinkedIn. I think it was on Training Journal. And obviously he's from the 70-20-10 Institute and is now part of a new consultancy. But he was yet again talking about performance improvement and criticising our profession for focusing too much on learning. And as Miles says, a lot of focus on, give me a course, I've got a problem, a course is what I need. And he's saying, no, this is an opportunity to move into a different way of working where we really are aligned with the business goals, and whatever we're trying to do is going to improve people's performance. So I wondered what your thoughts were on how well does your model, would it deliver a performance improvement program versus, if you like, a straightforward learning product?
Well, I would put the question out to everybody else, but learning is learning. Mm-hmm. you know, what is learning? So I'm just going to, Mark, I do like your question, and you might want to jump in and just say that and put your video on and everything.
Where's Mark? Mark Printer. Here we go. Mark, your audio is enabled.
He's fallen asleep. I know he is.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, sorry, having fun with my own mic. Why do I ask the question? I just wondered about sort of cognitive overload, really. A lot of people have been talking in the chat that they do virtual sessions, e-learning, that do a bit of face-to-face. And although you want to cover all of those different learning styles, I just wondered if it may be a bit too much for people. Which is why I put in the bit about, is it just really about understanding your end user and getting that really effective L&A done first? Or I don't know, just be interested in your thoughts, I suppose, about, is there such a thing as too much?
As I said, I really like the question, Mark, and thank you for asking it. I think the question is an interesting one, but is a question that's relevant. I think that, is it the more interesting one? Is it purely understanding your end user? Okay, it's the one and only time in my life I will ever refer to Jeff Bezos. The customer is always first. The customer is the centerpiece. You're there for the customer. You know, okay, so customers, learners, yeah. And they need to know what's in it for them. I used that phrase a little while ago in a webinar, and I was shot down in flames by various people who are involved in learning design, and it was far too salesy. But ultimately, I'm sorry, it's about telling the learner either explicitly or implicitly what's in it for them. What do they get out of it? What are they going to learn? Why? How? And how are they expected to use it? Because ultimately, what they know beforehand, their attitudes, their motivations to learn will shape what and how they learn, how they interpret it, and what they do with it. And so, classic situation, you can have 10 people in a classroom or 10 virtual learners and give them the same learning objectives, and you'll have 10 times different learning objectives. So therefore, the kind of CAP approach, the learning with understanding approach, is designed to help mediate that.
Excellent, thank you.
I'll disable you now, Mark. Thank you. Lesley, if people are interested in finding out more about this approach, what would you suggest they do?
Well, the best thing to do is just drop me a line. If you've got my email address, please contact me by email, or I'm on LinkedIn. The state of play with this is I've got various articles written and various presentations done. The actual methodology document itself is in the process of being written up by me. I'm hoping to showcase it and present it at the International Online Learning Consortium's conference in Florida at the end of the year, virtual, of course. Mm-hmm. Which will be a really neat sort of launch pad. It is being started up as a pilot in a college group starting from next week, and I'm training the teachers in how to apply it. So it's a gradual process of getting people to just it's in the public domain, you know, take it on, use it. It's explained. I've written enough articles and stuff on LinkedIn for people to find. All I would ask of people is let me know how you get on with it. I'd really be interested.
Great. Thank you. Well, thanks very much, Lesley. It was an interesting discussion, and thanks to those who participated through their audio channel. Can
I say thank you as well? It was great.
what I'd like to do is just remind people of what other things the ELN is up to. So this is I'll just show you now. I'm not on the right one, hang on. So that was your LinkedIn page, which I shared the link. Yeah, this is our website. It is actually about to be relaunched as in a new version, because there's a few bugs in this one. But yeah, if you're not already a member, if you go to elearningnetwork.org, then you can see the sorts of activities that we've been doing. And I mentioned the coffee morning earlier. Kim has been running a members only coffee morning once a month now, and she opens it up at 9 o'clock and stays there till 1 o'clock. And some of the directors drop in, and people just drop in and out for as long as they want. And there's so many interesting discussions, it's amazing. And then we've got another webinar coming up on the 24th of July, and some more coffee mornings scheduled. We haven't yet scheduled any webinars beyond July. We normally have a bit of a rest in August, but we'll be ramping up again in September. And we're also planning on the board, we're thinking, you know, we haven't had any face-to-face regional events. We cancelled London, Birmingham, Manchester, and we're probably going to cancel the Glasgow or Edinburgh one. And we're still not sure what's happening about Connect, but we will be doing more virtual things. So if you want to get involved in members only things like the coffee morning or the Slack channel or the mentoring, then just go to the website and click on the link that talks about membership there, and you'll be able to see what's available. And if anybody's working for a small company, they might be interested in becoming an industry partner. We're also on social media. We're on Twitter, and we've got 2 pages on LinkedIn, the company page and a discussion group. So do get involved, and let's hope we see you at another session soon. If you've got any comments for Lesley or myself, thank you, Duncan. That's nice feedback. And Ryan is probably gone, but that's good. Thanks very much. Oh, and one final thing, the recording for this will be available on our YouTube channel, which is here. I could put that in the chat as well. But you should get an update anyway through Zoom emails. And I've just published the one that was recorded last week, which was an O2 case study. So I don't think there's very much more to add, Lesley. I think thanks again, everybody, for joining. And Lesley, thank you for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Oh, Joan, thank you very much for hosting. Wonderful.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.